Alrighty. Well, welcome in. This was not the episode that we planned for today.
Sure wasn't.
There are a couple reasons why we're not doing the episode that was I was planning on. But the most important is that I really want to talk about this, and it's been on my mind for quite a bit of time. It was brought to more prevalence this weekend, and I've been talking about it a lot this week with clients and just in general. And it's also come to light, I think, even more this week. And so I told Amy before we started recording, I don't know exactly where we're going to land this plane. But this is sort of a concept that I've been thinking about for a while, and I think is an important message for us to talk about. So we're going to dive right in. So this weekend, I was at a conference in Dallas for fitness professionals called Raise the Bar. I went to this last year. It was my first conference last year that I had been to ever. Besides, I did like my certification, which had a live component to it back when I first started training. But I was brand new. Like, it was the first thing I did as a coach was go to that in-person thing. And it was wild last year. And it was like from an experiential perspective. And this year it was awesome as well, but in a different way. And it hit me a little differently. Mm-hmm. So which you would hope that it would.
Yeah, I mean, first year it's just about kind of experiencing it for the first time and soaking everything in. Second year, you can start to focus yourself.
Yes. So, the first year, last year, it was very much like drinking out of a fire hose. It was the experience, the speakers, all the people that I was meeting. It was like, this was overwhelming in a good way, but it was overwhelming. There was a lot, particularly with the speakers. These are all people who are 15 plus year veterans in the industry who are up there sharing about the things that they have done and the things that they are doing that matter for their businesses and matter for their clients. And it's a little bit of like, holy smokes, that's a lot. And these are people who have 7-8 figure a year revenue businesses. People who are, I say there's leaders in the industry and there's legends in the industry. Mm-hmm. And there's some like there were both there. And you see a little bit of the gap there. Mm-hmm. And we talked about this in the measuring progress sort of thing. Like, you see the gap between where you are and where they are, and you're like, that feels like an insurmountable chasm. And I may never achieve that, which is okay, right? They're unicorns for a reason. And so it was very overwhelming last year in a good way. And I came back and tried to kind of sift through all of it and figure out what are some of the things that I'm going to try to implement into my business. Because there's, this year was a little bit shorter, but last year was 2 2.3 days full of hour-long lectures. So there was something in the realm of 20 talks last year, an hour a piece. Mm-hmm. You can imagine that's a lot of information to try to sift through and navigate and be like, okay, what this year the consensus down to 2 days. I did a VIP day, which had an extra 4. So it was still something in the realm of 18 to 20 talks this year, which is just, it's a lot of information to kind of gather. I took furious notes last year. I took almost none this year. And I'll get to the reason why, but for me, it was this year. I was like, I'm going to pick the couple of things versus try to absorb all the things. Because it's a lot, and you can't implement all.
Did you find that you went? Did you find that you went back and reread all of the notes that you'd taken, or did you just kind of focus on what ended up being the one or two that resonated the most?
So last year, what I did when I came back was I got on a call with another coaching friend of mine who was there. It was probably 2-3 weeks afterward, and we just got on a Zoom call and we were like, let's just bounce ideas off of each other from what we talked about. Mm-hmm. And so at that point, I had my notes open. I don't think I've opened them since then.
Yeah. Okay.
And that was also the student that I was.
Right.
So like when I was a student it was why like people were dumbfounded by this, but like when I was in college, I took one of the hardest classes that I ever took. Probably the second hardest class I ever took was a class called linearity, which was, for my math education. It was a combination of multivariable calculus, differential equations, and linear algebra. It was exactly as horrible as it sounds.
Really terrible. I took a class called Teaching Math to Children. Yes. It was great.
It was not that. It was
former elementary school teacher. Very different experience. But what was the name of the course?
Linearity was the name of the course.
It's a very cool word. That'd be a great name for a bar.
Yeah.
Or a band. Great band name. I call it.
That's your band name?
Yeah. Or my bar. It's really up in the air. Kind of depends on how the weekend works out.
All I'm having right now is How I Met Your Mother things. Like it's Puzzles. Like Puzzles is the name of the bar. Why is it called Puzzles? That's the puzzle. Like
that's the puzzle.
That's what's in my head right now.
Yes.
So I took a class called linearity, and this was normally classes are semester long. Mm-hmm. This was a 2-semester long class because it covered 3 classes essentially, and it was honors level. So it was a smaller class. There was maybe 25 of us in there. It was a little bit more seminar style where we're figuring stuff out. And so whenever the professor was up there, lecturing sort of thing, or like going through the process, I didn't take any notes. I just watched him do it because I realized that if I took notes, I would not be understanding what he was doing. So like I have to follow your logic here. And now he did a good job. Like it was fortunate, but he had like his notes were typed up. And so other people were like writing notes on his notes or like writing notes in their own words, and people learn differently. I don't necessarily process that way. For me, I was like, I need to watch this. I need to listen to this and in order to understand what's happening. And then I'll go do it and I'll like try to figure it out. But like, I can't, if I'm focused on writing, I'm not totally paying attention to what's happening, and I'm certainly not processing it. Like for me personally,
because you're doing input as well as output, and the brain can't handle both of those things simultaneously.
Yeah, and I think everybody learns a little differently. But I noticed that when I was like ripping through notes last year, I'd be like, I have no idea. Like versus this time where I just sit back and I would just like listen, and then I would write down a line or two. Right. I'm like, oh, that was a bar. Like that was a good summary of their talk. Or that was a good principle. Like that was the thing that I want to make sure I remember. And the way that they said it was really good versus the overall concept. And then I could kind of take that and be like, okay, what did I take from that? So that was a little bit of an interesting distinguishing factor, but this is where I want to get to, and we're about 10 minutes in, but I have to like kind of get to the punchline early. And I talked about this, I think, when I talked about like my follower count and things like this, and I said like I don't necessarily want a large follower count on Instagram, right? Like it's kind of touted as a big thing, and I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, but I'm not chasing that. And for some reasons, and I might get there at some point, but I don't. It's not something that I'm actively pursuing. This I had realized this already, but it was thrown into sharp relief this time, which is I don't think I want a really large business. I don't think I want, at least at this stage.
At this stage,
what
when the kids are little.
These people are doing when my kids are little. So one of the first talks of the week, it was the first talk of the weekend during the VIP day. It was a woman named Rachel Shear, which I'd never heard of her before. But she's great. She was fantastic. One of the better speakers of the weekend, just in terms of, and there wasn't anything super unique that she said in this talk. It was just, she did it well. But she did say something that has been the thing for the weekend that has stuck with me the most. Of all the people who spoke, of all the things, because she asked this question. She said, who has the template for what you want? And how do you get close to them? Because somebody has the template. In the world that we live in, somebody has it. Particularly in somebody's done it. And how do you get close to them? Because that's going to expedite the process for you. And my challenge with that, and I chatted with her about it afterward, and I've spent the whole weekend thinking about it, and this week still, I don't know who has the template for me. I'm not saying that somebody doesn't, but in that room, I'm a bit of a unicorn. In a room full of 125, 150 fitness professionals, and this room is a different room than other rooms that I could be in. Other fitness conferences, right? The people, the demographic of coaches that go to this conference are different, and it's difficult to explain, but there are people who are further into their careers, right? I'm on the younger side of people in their careers at this conference. And I am more than double the industry average of time in the industry, right? So most people are 7, 10, 15 plus years in the industry at this conference. These are people with fairly substantial businesses. Oftentimes, certainly the speakers are. Last year, the guy who runs the mentorship that I'm part of, who's one of the leaders in he's bordering on the legend in the industry. His name's John Goodman, who is not a lot older than me, but he's just brilliant, right? And he's in his late 30s. He's got 2 small kids, 5 and 1 or something like that. He's built multiple 7-8 figure businesses, written 12 books, just brilliant guy.
Nice job, John.
Yeah. He could never work again if he wanted to, and he'd be just fine. So he was at Raise the Bar last year, and he spoke. And then he was also at a conference that I went to in Edmonton in October. And I was chatting with him in Edmonton because he and I are, at least, he knows who I am. And we can have a real conversation. And he was chatting about it, and he was talking about Raise the Bar. And he talked about how one of the speakers last year, who's brilliant, and I know who it was who he was talking about. Her name's Jill Coleman. Her Instagram is Jill Fit. She's brilliant, super business savvy, runs a great business, sweet and kind and generous. And she came on last year, and she gave an hour plus long talk about this super elaborate system that she has in place for generating leads and warming them and bringing them to the point where they want to purchase, and then how she delivers for them and how she keeps them getting results and referrals and all this, like this elaborate system that she's got. And it's like a 3-month long lead warming process with multiple email things and webinars. And it's a work of art that she's built. And there was another talk like that this weekend too, by Eve Guzman, who is, again, brilliant, runs a great business, brilliant. But John was talking about it where there was, I think, 19 speakers that raised the bar last year. Of those 19 speakers, 4 of them had kids. Of the 4 that had kids, 2 of them had kids after they had already built their businesses. John being one of them, the other one being Jordan, built their businesses pretty substantially. And the other 2, one of them, wife was stay at home, so he could work however many hours he wanted to. And that doesn't mean that there's not challenges and draws to be at home, but he worked as much as was needed. The other 2 were a team together, and it was a husband and a wife, and they kind of worked together,
built the business and built the family.
Yeah, I mean, they each kind of have their own businesses, but they kind of did it along the way. And they had established a good amount of their business before, but not quite to the level of Jordan and John before they had kids. And he said this to the point of, like, in the sense that I'm a unicorn in that room. One, I'm generally a unicorn in a lot of rooms, in the sense that I am a dad who catches a little bit more of the time with my kids than my wife does during the school year. Predominantly during the summer, it's a little different because my wife's a teacher and she's great. And we love that she does that. And we talked about that. And we've talked about, hey, do we go back and forth on this? And I'm not itching to not be this, right? There are certainly times where I'm drawn to my business and I would like to do more, but I'm also, and there are days that it's really hard to be, kind of dad and catch a little bit more of it. And she'll take days off when kids are sick, but there's a lot of things. It's like, okay, so-and-so can't take the kids today. It's like, okay, well, I'll just kind of move my schedule around because I have a little bit more of a flexible schedule. On Wednesdays, the twins are with me. I've done my work day at 3 p.m. every day for the most part, like with rare exception. And like I work 25 hours on a good week, which is it's usually closer to 18 or 20 on a good week. And that's not the norm in that room. That's not the norm in a lot of rooms, but that's certainly not the norm in that room, because that room is like full 60. Of that's a room full of hustlers.
Yeah.
That's a room full of grinders. That's a room full of people who are like, I will not be outworked.
Yeah, there isn't an end to the workday.
No. And that's not necessarily that's not an indictment on
no,
but like they are working because they also recognize the value and the purpose of what it is that they're doing. Like we are, like Natalia Mello said it really well. One of the speakers, she was like, don't call it a little business. Don't say, I do a little coaching. This is big business. We're changing people's lives. Like this is not a small deal what we do. And it's like, you're right. Like this is not a small deal what we do. We're not just business for the sake of business. But it's interesting to be in a room full of people. And now there are some other parents in the room. There are other parents with small kids. I don't know for sure, but I am willing to bet that I am 3 kids, 4, under 4, and being in that room, I was one of maybe 5 at the absolute most.
At max. Mm-hmm.
At max being in that room. And I'm almost 100% sure I was the only dude. in that role. Mm-hmm. Certainly the only dude in that role whose wife isn't primary caregiver. Mm-hmm. No indict, like, I'm not trying to stereotype or anything like that, but this was an observation that I made where I was like, okay, I'm in a different position than most people here. And this comes back down to expectations and the conversation that we had about expectations on a few episodes. And I chatted about this with Jordan Syatt right before he went on. He was the one who I was telling you about this, who blanked on my name up in front of everybody who was trying to tell this story.
Oh, yeah.
And he like
that guy, my friend, my good friend,
my friend, my good friend, and he just had a brain fart, and I decided not to give him a hard time when he came off, like on the stage, but I gave him a hard time when he came off the stage.
At least he didn't go full Travolta and just make something up that kind of sort of remotely a little bit sounded like it could have potentially at one point been your name.
Yeah,
like Adele Dazeem, my good friend.
No, and to be fair to him, right? Like, he meets a lot of people, and he and I had only met last year at Raise the Bar, and we had a good chat, right? But like, he met a lot of people last year at Raise the Bar, and he and I will chat on social media on occasion. But you know, he's got 900,000 Instagram followers. Like, he's talking to a lot of people.
It wasn't like
so. It wasn't intentional, but like, in you know, whatever. So. But he and I chatted about it right before we went on the stage, and he got asked about this because he has a 18-month-old, and he and his wife just announced that they're pregnant with their second. Aww. And he is, you know, he's around my age. You know, he's early mid-30s, and he's built his business. Like, he's got a fairly substantial business, and he built it even before he had his daughter. Mm-hmm. But somebody asked him about, like, hey, how do you balance family and work and, you know, all this stuff? He's like, I don't. Like, there is no such thing as balance here. Mm-hmm. Like, and at one season in my life, I worked like 48 hours straight. You know, like, I worked like an absolute animal. And now I'm like not. Mm-hmm. I'm working bare minimum so that, you know, I can kind of keep my business going. But he was like, it's not 50-50. It's like 88-12. Family to work right now for me, and it's just the season that he's in, and he's like, for me right now, family is top priority over work, and we had chatted about that ahead of time, which was I told him, I was like, it's interesting for me to be in this room because I cannot compare myself to the people sitting on either side of me, because I had great coaches on either side of me who I know and I'm friends with. But one of them is engaged and going to get married in January. The other one is married with no kids. And so, like, he was like going to leave Dallas, like, lives in Massachusetts, was going to leave Dallas, go to Toronto, and then go to Mexico. You know, it's like we're living different lives, you know, and just the it's not better or worse, but it's expectations wise, it's not reasonable for me to compare myself to people who are in a different stage of life than me.
Right.
From an absolute business revenue perspective. Because we're not living the same life. And I've talked about this, and I've known this before, but this like got brought into sharp relief this weekend. But then I go one step further which is like, hey, who has the template? And I was like, I'm not saying that nobody does, but I don't know of a lot of dads with small kids who were kind of quote unquote primary caregiver for their kids in terms of time, who built a business, right? That's not a common story. Right, you might have one of those things, right, or two of those things, but not a lot of people bring that all together. And so the whole purpose of this comes back to this point. And this is where I'm going to start to transition into what's the point of this and the thing that I'm floating out. But,
you know, we're only 25 minutes in.
It's going to be fine. This was good timing. I needed to bring the context. So I think I've talked about him on this podcast before. But there's a writer, a speaker, Netflix special guy called Ramit Sethi, who's got a book called I Will Teach You to Be Rich. He's got a Netflix special, How to Be Rich. He's got a website, I Will Teach You to Be Rich. And he's very bright guy and has grown a fairly substantial business surrounding how to build a business, how to find your dream job, how to manage your money, all these things. And he has a concept that I don't think is unique to him, but he's kind of coined it in this way, which is, what is your rich life? When he talks about, I will teach you to be rich, or how to be rich, right? It's catchy, but most of what he talks about is not necessarily how to amass the most amount of money that you can. It's how to live the life that you want to live. And the rich life can look different for every person, right? For my friends, for my friend Sam, who was like his rich life, when I asked him about the template and I was like, who has your template? And he's like, he was like, it's going to sound goofy, because he was like joking about it because he doesn't have kids. And he's like, he feels, sometimes he feels like he has to justify like why he doesn't have kids. I was like, you don't have to justify it to me, which is an interesting thing. Parents, if you're listening to this, people can make their own decisions. But and there's maybe a little bit more to it, but he and I were chatting about this, and he's like, I just want, I'd like to travel and tattoos and, doing the thing. And I'm like, love it, man. That's your adventure. It's, if you're on the fence about the kids thing, man, like, don't have kids. Like, it is.
Yeah, because it's kind of no going back.
There's no going back. Like, you can get a job and hate it and quit. You don't get to do that with kids. Like, you're in it. And so understand, like, there are a lot of benefits and wonderful things about having kids, but there's a lot of hard. There's a cost to having kids, financially, and also time and flexibility and freedom, all these things. And for some people that outweighs, and there's days where I'm like, I don't know if that equation's balancing the right way right now. But the idea of the rich life is you get to decide what it is. And there are some absolutes that come with it, right? You want to be able to afford to, put food on the table and a roof over your head and some of these things. But, and you don't want to be neglecting some of the realities. Okay. Not like, oh, I'm going to just get a bunch of credit card debt because I want to do what I want to do. Right. There are consequences to being frivolous or irresponsible with your finances and missing some of those things. However, it's not like being rich doesn't necessarily mean I have the most net worth, the most money in my bank account, right? Like, you could have somebody, you talk about people who are like, oh, I have a lot of money, but just kind of miserable because they're not doing things. So the story for this is,
I'm ready. I am so ready.
Called The Story of the Mexican Fisherman. Have you heard this story?
I have. But it's only because you told me on Tuesday.
I told it to you on Tuesday.
Yeah.
So, all right, Mexican fisherman.
I'll pretend I don't know, though.
Yes. So the Mexican fish. I shouldn't have told you on Tuesday, so you heard it for the first time today. Well, I didn't realize that we were going to talk about this today. It was literally like I was.
I have the memory of a goldfish, so like it's okay.
All right, so
I probably forgot most of it.
The story of the Mexican fisherman is. There's an American businessman who takes a vacation to Mexico, and he meets a fisherman who has a small little boat and goes out and catches some fish in the morning, enough for his family, comes back, feeds his family, plays with his kids, takes a siesta with his wife, goes and drinks wines with his friends in the village at night. And the American businessman goes, this is really good fish. Like, why don't you go for a little longer in the morning when you fish and you can get some more fish? And the fisherman goes, well, why would I do that? Well, then you could sell it in the market. And the fisherman goes, well, why would I, what would that do? And he says, well, if you sell enough fish, then you can hire one of your friends to come with you. And so now you can catch even more fish. And the fisherman goes, well, why would that matter? And the businessman goes, well, this is where it gets really interesting. Then you can buy more boats. And so now you have a few different boats and a few of your friends that you've hired, and now you're catching even more fish. And the fisherman goes, well, that sounds interesting. Why would I, what happens next? Well, then you have enough boats that you start selling your fish like canned and shipping it back to America. And now you get incorporated, and then you get an IPO on the stock market, and you make millions and millions of dollars. The fisherman goes, wow, that sounds really cool. What would I get to do then? And the businessman goes, well, then you can go out in the morning, you can fish for a couple of hours, and then you can come back in and you can play with your kids, and you can have a siesta with your wife. You can go drink wine in the village with your friends at night. And the point of the story is maybe more isn't necessarily better. Mm-hmm. It's better is better. What is it that we want? Like it's a kind of a silly story, but the idea of the Mexican fisherman has what he wants. Mm-hmm. And so he could go through all of this, 15 to 20 years worth of work, all kinds of headaches to end up where he
already is.
So I think about this with my business. If I had a 8-figure business right now, I have nowhere close to an 8-figure business, but let's just say that I had an 8-figure business. Let's just say I had an 8-figure
enough, sir.
No. If I had an 8-figure business, right? I have a bunch of employees, a bunch of coaches. What would my life look like? How would I draw it up? Mm-hmm. Well, I'd probably, like with my kids right now, I would probably want to have a couple of days where I'm taking my twins to the library, flippity flop. If my kids were sick, I would do it. I'd probably record podcasts with Amy. I'd probably still want to coach some clients. I still want to do some in-person stuff. I might golf one more day a week. But I'd be done work every day at 3 p.m. Mm-hmm. It looks not dissimilar to what I'm currently doing. And so the idea of what is it that I'm trying to build and to what end? Mm-hmm. And it can be seasonal, right? So like I've talked about, in 3.5 years, all 3 of my kids are going to be in school. That's a new season. 5 years after that, they're all in middle school, and they got a gajillion activities after school, right? And I'm just toting them. Now they're going to have activities before them, but like, going to sports games and ballet recitals, and you know what I mean? I'm going all over the place, mm-hmm. and weekend tournaments, and you know what I mean? Like that's a different season. Then they're off at college, and that's a different season. So this can change. I don't want to think about
that.
I know, and I'm not going there.
A little.
But in this season of my life, what am I hoping for? And Ramit calls these career seasons. Mm-hmm. And they all have a benefit. So like I was just talking yesterday, and what kind of sealed this for me was I was talking yesterday with a client of mine who's my first online client ever, who's still with me, 4 years later. His name's Remy. He was on this podcast in Amy's role a couple times. And I love Remy. And Remy is... He's dating somebody, he's got a serious girlfriend, but he's, in his late 20s, he's in sales, and he's just like, he's a grinder, man. He is in level up mode. He's just like, he's going all in. And it was interesting to chat with him yesterday because like you are like, he's just buzzing right now. He's like getting up. He's doing like, he's got his routines and he's writing and he's working out and he's crushing with his business and he's doing all kinds of stuff. I'm like, dude, you're in growth mode right now. Like you're in just blow it up mode. Like Jordan was 5 years ago when he was working all the time.
Mm-hmm.
He was in growth mode when he was training Gary Vee, working 365 days a year, training him, flying all over the world. Like he was in grind mode. He was in growth mode. He's like, I am gonna blow up because he could be, and that was what he wanted to do at that time. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like the guys on either side of me are in that mode where they're like, they came out of that conference being like, I got to hire more people, which is not a bad thing. They're like, I'm like, good on you. Like help more people, coach more people,
totally
have a bigger business, like impact the world. Like good for you. I'm in these mastermind, I'm in this, coaches mastermind, and we're doing like annual stuff, and people are out there throwing out like crazy numbers for revenue goals. And hey, what do you want the business to be? And they're like, I want to hire 5 new coaches this year. And guys making what I make in a year, they're making in a month or in 2 weeks or weekly, just like bonkers numbers that I'm part of. And it's hard in those moments not to look at that and be like, oh, I feel like I should want that too. And it's not bad to say that you do want it. And it's not to say that you have to be in a certain mode based on whether or not you have kids. So like Don Saladino, who I've talked about, is a great example of this, where he had small kids, but he grew his business during that season, right? Like he started training. He bought a gym in New York City and was training the biggest names in the world when his kids were little. Like he's got photos of like his kids being held by like friggin' Hugh Jackman when they're little. Like it doesn't mean that you have to be in a certain season because of the circumstances of your life. But we have to be super clear for what it is that we want and to what end, because the things that we do are going to serve that, are going to drive us to that. And we have to come back to that reality. Like if I had, again, an 8-figure business, the things that would be different in my life, we'd probably have a little bigger house, and I would probably golf once a week. That's about it. I don't think that we're off. Yeah. I don't think that we're going to be like traveling the world, because that's just not necessarily our MO. That's never been our thing. We might go out to dinner one more time a week, but it's not like, all right, am I willing to sacrifice a little bit of that, do that slower, or not ever get that for the sake of having almost everything else? It might be worth that trade-off. So there are seasons when it comes to our careers, and we have to decide what is our rich life. What is it that we're looking to do? So the thing that I've been kicking around, and I think that this just is similar to the message, and it's kind of the message that I've had for a while, but maybe be able to articulate it in the right way. Just like there is you get to define your rich life. You get to define it. You get to define your fit life. And what does being fit mean to you? And again, there are some absolutes, okay? You can't be irresponsible with your body, just like you can't be irresponsible with your finances, because there are consequences in absolutes. But there's a realm, a spectrum of where, like, hey, I'm doing all right, and like from a numbers, like I'm not in a lot of debt, but I'm not necessarily on paper as wealthy as the person next door, but I might be more wealthy in my life in terms of experiences and how my day-to-day looks than them. And that can be true as well of a fit life, right? There are absolutes, right? Like there are dangers to having excess body fat. There are dangers to having high blood pressure, you know what I mean, for your life. And you can say like unequivocally, that is not healthy that you're there. However, right, just because we've talked about this, just because somebody is ripped to shreds also doesn't necessarily make them healthy.
Right.
Right? There are, I would argue, there's a very high percentage of the population of people who are ripped to shreds who are not healthy in other ways.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Whether it's actually physically healthy, right? There's like dangerously low, like you hear Natalia talked about it this weekend, right? You get bodybuilding, who she was Miss Bikini Olympia or something like that. Talk about like you lose your period, like bodybuilder,
Mm-hmm.
like women who get wicked lean lose their period. Like
Mm-hmm.
there are health disadvantages to getting there. There's also mental health disadvantages, high eating disorder, right, and relationship with food, and like social health, like you don't have a life because you're just eating out of Tupperware and you're focusing on your sleep and you don't enjoy yourself. So, and if you're bodybuilding, you're not thinking about things like your cardiovascular health. Oftentimes you're just doing
Mm-hmm.
the things you need for your sport. You're not doing any power training,
Mm-hmm.
like explosive work, because that doesn't necessarily lend to what it is. So again, I'm not picking on bodybuilding, but like that's an extreme side of the spectrum.
Right. Right. I don't think it reads that you're picking on anybody. I think it's just
No.
that's such a clear example.
Yeah. And so we could be, and it doesn't have to be bodybuilding, right? It could just be people who are really lean.
Mm-hmm.
That there's a cost to this. So I heard this. This was a story that I heard when I was a camp counselor 13 years ago, 14 years ago, a summer camp. And the camp director was talking about this, and it was talking about priorities and talking about stuff like this. And he was saying, I was talking to a buddy of mine who was thinking about getting divorced,
Mm-hmm.
and he was like, "Hey man, what happened? Like what's going on?" He's like, "Yeah, we don't connect anymore. Like we're just, you know, it's just we never have sex, and it's just the relationship just feels cold." And and then in a separate conversation, director looked down and was like, "Man, like you look good. Like you put on a lot of muscle. You leaned out. Like how's it been going?" He's like, "Oh man, yeah, I'm working out all the time. 2 hours in the morning before work, 2 hours in the afternoon after work, every day, 365." And didn't see the connection between like, listen, you can have. We've talked about this. You can have everything, but you can have anything, but you can't have everything.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you have to choose the cost. And there's a cost with when it comes to your finances. There's a cost to the rich life, right? I am
Mm-hmm.
giving up some things financially for the freedom that I currently have. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the trade-off I'm willing to make,
Mm-hmm.
because the freedom matters more to me. The same thing can be true with your fitness, right? I could be leaner. Me personally, I could be leaner than I am, and it wouldn't border on, okay, this is like, I'm not in danger of my health. It would on paper potentially even make me a little bit healthier. On
Mm-hmm.
paper, like I'd be a little bit lower body fat percentage, might even have a little bit better cardiovascular health, whatever. But what would that cost me? Oh, that would mean that I'm probably in the gym more,
Mm-hmm.
which costs me time with my family or time with my
Yep.
business. Um, it would probably mean that I'm not enjoying maybe as many of the foods that I like, going out to dinner with my wife and being able to just be like, hey, we're going to get the cheesecake
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to have a margarita. Going to have pizza with my kids because we got pizza.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that trade-off's worth it. Having an extra 5 to 8 pounds of body fat, which is, again, it's not like you would look at me and be like, you got 5 to 8 pounds of body fat to lose. But you'd be like, I could be there and I would walk around the beach, the 3 days a year that I'm there and, be be wicked lean, but like, what's the point?
Yeah.
What's the point? I don't know if there's now there was a point where I did around this time last year where I did a little bit of a cut where it was like I was higher. I was like, so I walk around right now like high 170s. I was like high 180s. And I had like intentionally put on some weight. And some of it was unintentional.
Mm-hmm.
But it was like my pants don't fit the way that I want them to. And I just didn't
Pants
feel great. I didn't love how I felt in my pants. And that was the extent of it.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, okay, I'm just going to lose a little bit of weight just to fit better in my pants.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't do it in a way that's like, oh, okay, I gotta do this super extreme. I'm just gonna be a little bit more aware of what I'm doing, but I'm still gonna enjoy some of these things that I enjoy. And so I found out I was like, I'm good here, where I was like, if for me to go any leaner would cost me something I'm not willing to pay.
Mm-hmm.
So when we think about our fit life and the concept of the fit life, it is very much dependent on what do you want it to be. This goes back to the conversation that we had about point A and point B.
So
this is your point B. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This is your point B.
I think it's hard for people to understand that their point B can shift. And
yeah,
like, I know that when I started out, my point B was very different from what it is now.
mm-hmm.
But also that your point B is not going to necessarily be what it used to be when you're in your 20s.
Yeah.
Like for me, I'm in my 40s. I'm on a health journey. And when I think about my point B back then, it was a number on the scale.
Mm-hmm.
And a number on the scale that I will be honest, I never saw, because it's what I weighed when I was in 5th grade. So like there was just no way that was going to happen again. But like now my point B has nothing to do with a number on the scale.
Mm-hmm.
I have not stepped on a scale and I can't tell you how long, because that's not a part of the data that I keep.
Yeah. Well, so you said something there that's super important. You said a couple things there that are super important.
Well, everything I say is super important.
I understand. One is that it can shift, and it will shift depending on the season of life that you're in. Two, the data you keep, this was the way that you said, the data you keep should be reflective of the destination you're looking for, or the outcome you're looking for, right? The process versus the outcome. We're just bringing everything together right now. The process versus the outcome. We need to measure data relative to the outcome that we want. It would not make sense for me to solely focus on the revenue of my business during this season, because that's not the only goal of my business. That's not the primary goal of my business. Now, this is difficult. Like the tension for me here is very real. It's very difficult for me to not be like, oh, dang, it's not, whatever. It's not up to this point. And it doesn't mean that I don't walk by the mirror and be like, yeah, man, I feel like I'd like to be a little bit leaner than I am right now. Or I'd like to be a little bit stronger than I am right now. It doesn't mean that you can't want the other things. But we always have to come back to the thing that we want most and that we value most. Like, what are, it's like, it sounds cliche, but like your core values, but the things that's like, what are the priorities in your life? And when it comes to your fitness, it could be like when I talk to people about it, particularly parents, we talked about it, and somebody asked me this this weekend. Like, what do your clients want? And the word that I always come back to that most people want when it comes to their fitness that I talk to is freedom. Like, if I was going to boil it down to one thing, it would be freedom. Freedom to walk into their closet and pick Well, it's all of these things. Walk in the closet, take
Mm-hmm.
any clothes off the hanger, and feel good wearing them.
Mm-hmm.
Freedom to go to the beach and take your cover off and go swimming with your
Mm-hmm.
kid without worrying about it. Freedom to eat the foods that they love to eat without worrying that it's going to derail them. Freedom to go hiking with their friends when their friend asks them to go hiking, and not, even if they hadn't trained for it, be like, I can hold my own. Freedom to lift heavy things around the house without worrying about getting hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Freedom to chase your kids around without being exhausted.
Yeah.
Freedom to do the things that we want to do without hesitation.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we think about that freedom, very little of that for most people is tied to, like, we can get almost all of that freedom and leave some of the leanness on the table. Right? Like I can feel all of that freedom and have, quote unquote 5 to 10 more pounds to lose
Mm-hmm.
from like what I
It's
think
worth
my
it.
goal would be. And that's a
Mm-hmm.
worthwhile trade-off. Like, and it's tough to hear that if you've never actually experienced it. But losing the last 10 pounds is overrated. Now
I
you
think more
you can
women need to hear that.
yeah. Yeah. Now it's you can hear that. It's almost impossible to believe. It's like that's like the 100 millionaire saying more money doesn't make you happy. It's like, well, I mean, come on now.
I mean, sure would help.
It's difficult to hear that, particularly from somebody who doesn't worry about money.
Mm-hmm.
You know, um, and it's hard to hear that from a coach. Be like, all
Mm-hmm.
right, you almost have to experience it. But the question that it comes down to is this: what is it going to cost you to get there, and are you willing to pay that cost? And so the question that I ask a lot, and I talk about this with Megan when it comes to our life, like when we talk about, hey, primary caregiver and career stuff. Hey, do you want to leave teaching to go do your
Mm-hmm.
photography full time? All of these things. The question that we always come back to is, if you could write it up exactly how if we wrote the book of our lives, how would it be written?
Mm-hmm.
What would it look like? What would the day to day look like? When would we wake up? Now we may not be able to get all the way there, right? But it's just like you build your schedule out with like, all right, what are the most important things? And then I fill in the rest of the stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
then some of the stuff's going to go by the wayside.
Yep.
But those things, we talk about this with a budget.
Yeah.
You
Level
know,
the priorities.
yeah, got to pay the rent, got to pay the groceries,
Mm-hmm.
got to put gas in the tank.
Mm-hmm.
But with the money that's left over, what do you value? What's your rich life? And so in the same way, like once we get to a point where we're like, okay, we're in the ballpark of a healthy human being, right? Like I'm not concerned about my health here, right? We might be in, two different body types,
Mm-hmm.
two different, hey, this person holds on to a little bit more body fat, this person holds on to a little bit less body fat, but the person who's holding on to less body fat is not necessarily more healthy than the person who's holding on to a little bit more if they're in that range, but the
Mm-hmm.
person who's holding on to a little bit less probably gives up other things.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not better or worse, it's just what they're choosing to do. Because being leaner matters more to them. And that's fine. But
Mm-hmm.
the person over here who's like, you know what? I'd rather have another, 5-10 pounds on, but be able to do XYZ. that matters more to them.
Mm-hmm.
But you get to define that for yourself. And it's essential that we do, because coming back to the conversation of point A to point B, if we don't know where it is that we're going, then we're building something and we're comparing ourselves to something that we may not actually want.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was my big takeaway from this weekend, which was, it doesn't make sense for me, because it's not what I want right now, to do all of the things that everybody's laid out. Right? It would not make sense for me to try to build out Jill Coleman's lead system.
Mm-hmm.
Because what it would require from me is not something I'm willing to pay. That doesn't mean that it's a bad system or it's a bad thing. It's just not the right fit for me right now in this season.
Mm-hmm.
Am I willing to make less money? Do I want to make more? Sure.
Sure, of
Sure I do.
course.
But am I willing to work significantly more hours to get there? No, I'm not.
Mm.
And so I have to be okay with the fact that I'm not going to make as much as my counterparts.
Mm-hmm.
Like I have to be okay with that. The idea of like, you know, this is a little bit of the road not taken, right? But like, listen, if I was 25 and single, and I was at this point in my career with the connections that I've made, I'd probably move to Los Angeles.
Mm.
And I'd try to.
Oh no!
I'm not, you know, there's no, like, this isn't even remotely close on the board, and I'm not even saying I want to. But if I was, I'd be like, listen, there's an opportunity here. I'm going to go move to LA, and I'm going to try to train celebrities that the people that I know
Mm-hmm.
don't have room for. And they would probably send them my way. And I would build up a brand surrounding that, and I would maybe do some different stuff. I don't know for sure I would do that, but I would maybe give it a shot. But, like, that's not even on the table. So, like, why am I even going to, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not entertaining that. I'm not like, oh, I want to go do that. Because it's a buddy of mine who's, like, one of my best friends lives in, he moved to Virginia a couple of years ago. And he jokes with me all the time. And he's like, hey, when are you moving down here? And I'm like, I'm not going to move to Virginia. He's like, oh, well, you could run your business from here and you could do this. I'm like, listen, my in-laws live 3 minutes down the road. My parents live 10 minutes down the road. My wife's, I'm like, I can reach out my hand and touch the school that my wife works at. And I get to go over there and I walk with her 4 days a week during her break in the middle of the day. I train at a gym that I've worked at for 10 years with relationships or 5 years that I have relationships that I like.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'll take the cold.
You built
I'll
a
take the
life
cold.
here. You built an admirable life here.
And it's not to say that there's not benefits to doing that, right? Like, I miss him like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And, yeah, it'd be nice to have warm weather. Like, Megan and I have talked about, like, you know, we have friends who just spent the last 5 weeks in Hawaii because
Wow.
she's a photographer and he runs a real estate and development business. And so they could just be like, all right, we're just going to, you know, she's in her off season for photography and he can just be like, all right, I'll just do it remotely. And they went and they bugged out and they brought their 2 kids and they homeschooled them and they did life in Hawaii for 5 weeks. And it's like, oh, that'd be cool. But what's the cost of that? Not from a financial perspective, but like for them, that's their rich life. Mm-hmm. For us, I'm like, dude, we'd have to pay for my parents and my in-laws to come. Like, it becomes a lot less financially doable, you know, just with what we're doing. And so it's a matter of draw it up. And then the question comes down to, and this is the real thing that I'm still wrestling with, who has the template for your fit life? Who has the template for your rich life with your finances? Like, who's doing it the way that you want to do it? and get close to them and ask them how they did it. Like, get a coach,
Mm-hmm.
get a financial coach, get a business coach, get a fitness coach, get a nutrition coach, get a.
I know a good fitness coach.
Well,
If anyone needs recommendations,
I appreciate that, but there are coaches that
I
like
didn't
I
say
had
it was
some.
you.
No, I know. I'm assuming. But
Full of
there was
ourselves,
somebody,
aren't we?
but there was somebody who reached out to me who I know well, who was like, "Hey, do you train people for bodybuilding competitions?" And I said, "No." I mean, could
Yeah.
I?
You
Maybe
could figure it out.
I
Yeah.
could figure it out, but like, you're way better off going to somebody who's A, done it
Yeah.
themselves, or B, has done this for other people before. There's a thumbs up.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I haven't. Doesn't mean that I couldn't, but like,
Mm-hmm.
I'd be flying blind a little bit.
Yeah.
But if I get a mom with, stay at home mom with two kids who is trying to lose, 25, 30 pounds, that she's, just hasn't been able to find the time to work out, and she's working out while her kids are napping and can't figure out how to meal prep because all her kids want to eat are dino nuggets and mac and cheese,
Oh
right?
God.
That's
I'm
that's what I do.
I'm sure I'm
That's
gonna
what
miss
I
the
do.
Dino Nugget mac and cheese stage eventually, but right now there's only so many Dino Nuggets you can look at.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. And so you got to figure out what your rich life is, figure out what your fit life is, figure out what it is, how it would be if you drew it up,
Mm-hmm.
and figure out who has the template. And then, like Amy said, only keep the data that's relevant to that.
Mm. Man, I'm so wise.
Just spitting bars
Whew.
over here. And
Look at
then
me.
this is the last thing, and I said this from in my post yesterday or 2 days ago from the conference, and one of the coaches said that choose to believe the evidence that you generate.
I loved that one. I saw that on your Instagram feed.
Yeah.
I thought that was great.
Choose to believe the evidence that you generate. So if you're tracking it, right, like, why would I think that I'm not doing well?
Mm-hmm.
The evidence would point, like, the only reason I would think that my business is not doing well would be if I'm comparing not an irrelevant data point, but a data point that is not necessarily indicative of my goals to
Mm-hmm.
somebody else who has different goals.
Mm-hmm.
The only way that I would feel like my business is failing is if I compare my revenue to somebody else who's in a different
Mm-hmm.
stage. That's
Yeah, it's
it.
comparing apples to oranges and expecting the juice to taste the same.
Yeah. And then believe it if it's not telling you that, right? So if it was the
Mm-hmm.
flip side of it, which is like, hey, I want this life, and the evidence is like, yeah, you don't got that.
Right. Right.
Then I have to make changes. So like, if the evidence was like, so this was the turning point last year, and we'll finish with this. Rich life, fit life. Last year, I trained the high school and middle school athletes after school in the
Mm-hmm.
winter from November through middle of March. So 4.5 months.
Mm-hmm.
And it was right on the heels of Megan's busy photography season. So she goes back to school, and it's her busiest photography season. So she's working like a absolute animal September and October. Like, she's working so hard. And we miss her, right? But she does that for a season. And then we go right from that into me being busy for 4.5 months. So there was 7 months basically straight through where one of us was running. And it was 3 nights a week that I would get home at like 6 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
And my kids go to bed at 7.
Mm-hmm.
I come in, and she'll have had to have picked everybody up and done the whole afternoon and done dinner. And she's going to have to jet out the door to go do her workout or not do a workout because she's at school all day. And so that was a neglect. I didn't see my kids. And so she's exhausted, understandably, because she taught all day and then she had our kids solo for 3 hours. And then I come in and I have an hour with them, and I'm like coming in and they're frustrated and I'm tired from my day, and I got to come in and she's tired, and there's no real connection there for any of us. And it wore on us. And I love coaching the high school kids. I'd done it for 4 years. Like some of those kids I'd had relationships with for a long time. And I love doing it. And certainly it was a quote unquote, a very good financial, like hourly time for me to go and do it. And I enjoyed doing it from a business perspective. I didn't do it this year because the cost was too high for what it was that I wanted. I chose to make less money. And somebody asked me, like, so you can't do afternoons? It's not to say no, it's not that I can't. Like, we could make it work. We did it. We did it for a couple of years. Like, she's home. It's not like we couldn't do it. But I won't. I'm not going to. Not because I don't think it's valuable. Not because I wouldn't like to do it. But I'm not going to pay the cost. Because it doesn't align with my rich life. And the same question could be asked of when it comes to my fit life. Could I get leaner if I didn't eat pizza? Absolutely.
But you'd be miserable because pizza is delicious.
Pizza is the best food.
Pizza is life.
Yeah. I don't know if I go that far, but pizza is the best.
I would.
I think there's more to life than pizza.
I don't know. I mean, has it ever disappointed you? Really?
This is true. Yeah, it has, actually. I've had bad pizza.
What?
I've had bad pizza.
No. Was it homemade?
Some of it was. I've had like from not from like a pizza joint, but I've had like pizza from places where I'm like, that was mediocre. But it's the same idea. It's like I'm not willing to, like, I'd rather not be quite so lean, but still enjoy pizza. That doesn't mean that somebody who decides not to, like I've talked about this, like Don, for his business, right? He trains superheroes. Don's got to walk around shredded and jacked, and you know what I mean, and just because that's his brand, that's who he is, and that's who he attracts. It's not wrong.
Not at all.
But for him, that's what he wants.
His life.
That's what he wants. That's the life that he has decided that he wants to do, and there's nothing wrong with that. And so the things that he does align with that. It's one of the things that I admire about Don is that, like, Don was supposed to be at Raise the Bar this weekend, and he had to cancel. And I asked him, I just sent him a message. I was like, "Hey man, I'm bummed I'm gonna miss you." He's like, "Yeah man, like sometimes it's just it can distract from the bigger thing. Like I love going to these things, but like I have there's other things that I'm focused on doing." And it's like, yeah, it didn't align. In this season, it didn't align for Don, so we said no. And the ability to say yes to the things that you want to say yes to, and no to the things that you don't care as much about. That's what defines your rich life. That's what defines your fit life. So if you're listening to this, ask yourself that question. You can do it on both sides, right? Like, listen, what is your rich life? What's your fit life? Because your fit life probably leads into your rich life. They're very much aligned. Okay. But what if you could write up your life? What would it look like? What would you do? What would you feel like? What would you look like? How much money would you have? What would you be able to do? And then work backward from the solution. Like, all right, if that's what I want, then let's collect some data and then figure out who's got it.
Yeah.
You better believe that, like, for the next couple of weeks until I find somebody, that's my biggest takeaway from Raise the Bar. If I do nothing else from Raise the Bar, but I find the person who has the template for what it is that I'm trying to build during this season, that'll be worth the price of admission and then some. Like if
But
I
it's
do
possible.
if I do none of the funnels, if I do none of the anything, and I do that, that's my takeaway. One thing. What's the one thing?
The
All
one
right.
thing could be that one of your missions in life that is now presented to you is that you are the guy to make that template for the
Oh
generations after.
boy, you can't. Don't go there. That's gonna make my head hurt a lot. Oh, don't.
I'm challenging you.
No, I know, and it's been there, and I don't like it. It was what Rachel said, and I was like, don't go there.
See,
I'm
Rachel's
not.
smart too.
Yeah, well, I'm not ready to. I'm not ready to go there yet. But because I'm not. I'm not convinced that I am the only person to be doing this in my current stage.
Okay.
Like, I'm not convinced that that's real. I might be
They've
doing
got to
it.
exist.
They got to exist. I just don't know where they're
Yeah.
at.
Yeah.
If you're a dad listening to this, building a business with kids,
With
3 kids, 4
3
and
kids
under,
under 4.
and who are the primary caregiver for your kids, hit me up. I'd love to chat with you. Even
Man,
if you're
your
a
inbox is
mom.
going to be flooded.
Yeah, blowing up with our peeps from Australia and the UK who are doing this. Oh man, our connection has been wild this time. Hopefully, it's been okay, but it's been a little rough.
I can't
But
wait to check the
see
audio
how
afterwards.
this
Yeah.
went.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, again, I would encourage you. This may be. So I wanted to record this because I wanted to kind of verbalize it. I'm a verbal processor, as many of you know, and I try to articulate it. But this is going to be something. If this is something that resonated with you, the idea of a fit life, it's something that I think I'm gonna steer into for a bit.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to content messaging, I feel like it encapsulates a lot of the things that we talk about on here, and I talk about a lot. And so, if this is something that does resonate with you, I would love it if you send me a message and tell me what is your fit life, or if you need help figuring it out. I'd love to kind of hash that out with you. That's what I do. Is just like I'll hop on a call with you and we'll figure it out together. I'm pretty good at asking questions to help you get there. Amy can attest to that.
Yes, he's very good at it.
The face of disgust.
Have your tissues handy.
Yeah, but appreciate you all listening to my slightly rambly thoughts, and hopefully it was valuable to you. But
I think it was.
Resources, if you're interested, obviously, reach out to me. But more stuff on A Rich Life. You can check out Ramit Sethi, Sethi. He's got a book, I Will Teach You to Be Rich. He's got a website, I Will Teach You to Be Rich. He's got a Netflix special, How to Be Rich. I'm just going to point to him. He doesn't need me to, but I'm just going to point to him because he's pretty fantastic. Yeah, we'll be back next time with whatever the regularly scheduled programming is. But have a good one. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.